Now, there has been some significant decrease of harmful human practices on the environment since the worldwide lockdowns. Experts say with governments imposing restrictions on movement of people, the daily carbon emissions per capita has fallen by 30% and carbon emissions from transport has fallen by 60%. But now that lockdown restrictions are lifted, researchers have found that carbon emissions are starting to go up, and this is raising fears that annual emissions of greenhouse gases could surge. For more on the impact of COVID-19 on the environment and how Africa can recover, I'm joined by Veri Shaba, and Veri is the founder and CEO of Green Design. Lovely to have you with us this afternoon, Veri. I wonder, though, are you surprised the fact that the rates of carbon emissions are starting to go up again, seeing that there really wasn't any real behavioral change during the lockdown?
Hi, thank you for having me. So I'll actually say that we're not surprised at all. The community, in terms of climate change activists, we're not surprised because it's what is called a bounce back effect. And what the bounce back effect is that you're exactly right. If people don't change their behavior and don't understand and have a conviction for why they mustn't consume as much as they do, as soon as they have the opportunity again and the resources are available, then they immediately go back to how they were before. So unless people change their behavior about how we interact with the climate, most of the time you won't actually see a change.
And so talk us through some of the benefits that the environment experienced during the lockdown when people were out of the equation and they were no longer a pollutant or a problem to the environment.
There was quite a few benefits. I think the most obvious one that we immediately saw was air pollution actually decreased. And that was because of a reduction in terms of the electricity consumption, but also in terms of manufacturing activities. And if I put it into kind of perspective, air pollution kills 1 in 10 people. And that is just premature death that can happen. And especially in our country where we've got a high prevalence of things like tuberculosis, air pollution has such a really bad effect to the lungs of the people within those areas. So that's one of the main and most obvious things that we saw across the world was a decrease in air pollution, and that really did benefit the environment because also with a decrease in air pollution, you have a decrease in emissions that are going out into the atmosphere and either causing global warming or ozone depletion.
So, Veri, what are the lessons that humanity and human beings can learn from the lockdown so that we are not as detrimental as we have been to the environment moving forward?
I think one of the greatest lessons and some of the things that we saw is that a lot of the times we'd ask for things like virtual conferences, and that's what we used to ask for before lockdown. And then suddenly, as soon as lockdown happened, it took about less than a week, and suddenly all the conferences were virtual. And I think that what this actually shows to us is that when it comes to climate change, it really is about behavioral change. It's about a consciousness. And it's also about trying to get our economy to go away from being a linear economy into a circular economy, which is something that now we can see people are doing. Quick example as well is if you look at the fashion industry, textile industry is the second highest polluter after oil and gas. With the lockdown, people were buying less clothes and no one died. And so that's why I feel that there's definitely a lot of things that one can learn. And I think the main thing that we learned in lockdown is that it's all about behavioral change. Humanity can be more responsible. And it's sad that it was coronavirus that had to show us that this is how it can happen.
But also, as we said earlier on, I guess the true test of this is in its sustainability, because only in its longevity are we able to, re-strike a balance, man and nature living together in peace. But you also say that the green economy has the potential to produce about 24 million jobs. Talk to us about that.
That's exactly it. So the World Green Building Council, they released a study recently that said millions of jobs can actually be created in terms of the green economy because, first of all, it's a new economy that is still being established. And if you look at the green economy, it looks at things like ranging from energy to transport to mobility to water to air quality. So there's this huge spectrum that the green economy really covers. And what's nice is that in Africa, we've got the youngest population, but also we have a lot of unskilled people. And the green economy is inclusive to unskilled youth. And there is so much potential just in unlocking the green economy. So if you look at things like the green recovery, the IMF has released funding that goes towards the green economy. When you look at the IFC, they've released funding that goes specifically towards green bonds and green mortgage and green finance. And so that means that there's this amount of money, there's $800 billion, is what they said. And so there's this amount of money that's being unlocked for projects that actually save the planet.
If you could talk to us about the property industry and how that then is tied into the green economy.
So the property industry, when you look at buildings consume 40% of the energy consumption that happens, and all of that doesn't really need to happen. The only reason they consume so much is because we don't design our buildings with sustainability in mind. And that's always been a problem. Again, it goes back to what we said about human behavior. And so in terms of the property industry and some of the work that even green design does is we look at buildings and we say, how do we make it more efficient? Because if you're using less energy, less water, and less waste, then that means that you are spending less on energy, on water, and on waste. All three of those are not fundamental core amounts that building and property owners need to be spending on. And so we love buildings because it's a very low cost to make them efficient, and that will already start to decrease the emissions that are being released from building operational costs and also from embodied energy that goes into building materials.
And you spoke about costs there. What are the costs of really transforming buildings and making them green? Is it something that's affordable for the average person?
It actually is, and I think sometimes the question is not if you can afford a green building. I think the question is, can you afford not to have a green building? So the Association of Quantity Surveyors actually does a study yearly to talk about what the cost of green buildings are, and currently it's sitting at 1.1% cost premium. So it's not, back in the day it used to be 10%, 15%, now it's only at 1.1%, and you can get your payback period within 5 years. And there's lots of soft loans and green loans that go specifically towards having green initiatives in place. That's things like green bonds and green mortgage and green finance. So we're kind of sitting at 1.1%. And I would say that the average household can, but if you're looking at just, let's say, a residential unit, so single unit residential, they are now options where you can, it's called energy as a service, so where you actually just pay monthly and it goes towards someone else who's owning or who took on the capital cost for the solar panels that you have on your rooftop. So all you're doing is you're paying a monthly amount, but it's going towards that company that installed a solar panel on your rooftop, for instance.
Very interesting, dynamics and interesting aspects to consider when one looks at greening their entire life. Now, you will remember, Vera, that during the lockdown, we started seeing a whole lot more wildlife, coming out of places that we perhaps before didn't even know they were. Now that human beings are starting to repopulate those spaces, what about the wildlife? What happens to them?
And I think that's the thing, and that's why I wish that we had done more as climate change activists and as intersectional environmentalists to talk about behavioral change during lockdown. Because what's going to happen now is that, as you said earlier, there's that bounce back effect. Humanity is just going to go back to business as usual, back to a new normal. But the problem is that normal wasn't normal to begin with because we were living way beyond the planetary boundaries of this earth. And we've been doing so yearly. Every year we actually have our, because there's a date where it's called Earth Overshoot Day. And every year our Earth Overshoot Day was happening in about June, and it kept on going back. And that's when we've depleted all the resources for the year. And that would happen in the middle of the year. And so I think that we should be mindful that to allow kind of the animals and the flora and the fauna, and we should just be more responsible as humanity. But that's something that's going to be a behavioral change decision now again, as opposed to something that can be mandated until that starts to become mandated by government.